Cool, guys. Very shortly, I'm going to bring up your next speaker. He's actually got a new book out called Blockchain Radicals. He will be just outside after his speech, signing copies and selling books as well, so you're welcome to go and have a chat with him afterwards. Or if you want to ask questions sort of at the end of a speech, do join the chat room. You can ask questions in there. That's an option as well. Ladies and gentlemen, on what does it mean to be a radical, please welcome Joshua Dávila.
Is it working? No. Nice. I have 20 seconds. What? No, 5, 2, 1. Is it working? Okay, now we're good. Hi everyone, my name is Joshua Dávila, and I recently wrote a book titled Blockchain Radicals: How Capitalism Ruined Crypto and How to Fix It. I wrote the book over the past couple of years, and it's coming out this August 8th. You can pre-order it through my publisher at repeaterbooks.com. You can also find it on Amazon and everywhere else. But for this talk, I just wanted to talk about a bit about the book and sort of the overarching structure of it. But to start off, in case you don't know me, you may know me online as the Blockchain Socialist. That's sort of like my logo that I use everywhere. I've been working in blockchain for a little over 5 years. I started my blog/podcast of that name called of the Blockchain Socialist about 3 years ago. I co-founded a project called Breadchain Cooperative, which is a federation of different projects that are values aligned. On the more progressive side, we have the Crypto Commons Association, PacDAO, which is based in New York City, and LaborDAO. I'm filming a documentary in crypto, and recently on my podcast been focusing a lot on the network state and sort of our critiques of it and producing alternatives to Balaji's very wild idea. But so let's talk about the overarching structure of my book. To understand it, let's first understand what I call, or what is called, the critique of representational thinking. So this was an idea or framework proposed by the post-Marxist philosopher Gilles Deleuze, who's a French guy in like the 70s and 80s. But in his work, Difference in Repetition, he kind of proposed that oftentimes people try to understand new things by imprinting examples of the old. And to sort of understand why this type of thinking can be problematic, I like to use the example of the drum machine. The drum machine was invented way back when as something that you could purchase in order to play music with your buddies, but maybe your drummer wasn't able to come by. So you bought the machine, you put the buttons in, and then you press play, it plays the beats, and you can strum your guitar along with the drum machine. And this was the purpose of its invention. The sort of the framework of the drum machine in this type of way is that the drum machine was a representation of a drummer, right? So the drummer is the ideal form in the Platonic sense of like what is the best way to kind of make drumming music. And the drum machine was just a lesser version of it. It was just a representation. But what actually happened in history is that people took the drum machine and they turned up the dial and they used it in ways in which the drummer could never actually play music themselves. So the drum machine went past its representational model, or you can also think that the representational model that it was sort of thought about under wasn't correct in the first place. It was always wrong. So thinking in a representational way can be very problematic and very limiting for how we actually use the things that we use, that we may want to use. And so Deleuze calls representational thinking, he describes it as thinking like a tree, or arboreal thinking, in which the ideal form is at the trunk and everything else comes out as a representation. It's branches of the ideal form. And this is a very problematic way of thinking. Instead, he's very obsessed with potatoes. So he likes to say that we should be thinking rhizomatically. We should be thinking in ways that has no clear center, in which it is where the center is sort of idealized in a particular way. Mushrooms also have a rhizomatic structure through their mycelial networks, which is why I've worn my mushroom shirt today. But so I'm saying this because my argument is that representational thinking is endemic in crypto. It's all over the place. The white paper for Bitcoin itself was peer-to-peer cash. And then afterwards, the kind of representational model and metaphor that people like to use to understand it was thinking about it as digital gold. You know, when we think about smart contracts, which is also itself a representational model, sometimes we think code is law. Like everywhere you look, whenever you know nothing about crypto, you try to learn about it, like you come across things that are using sort of traditional structures or functions that exist already and trying to imprint that into what is crypto in order to understand it, or to get people to understand it. But this is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes it's good to use metaphor to help people understand things, but we have to understand its side effects and who are the people that are actually making these representations and these metaphors in order to understand this new thing that we call crypto. And so if we take just the example of Bitcoin being digital gold, there already existed like a pretty non-significant amount of people who are really into the idea of gold as being like the ultimate form of money. This highly commoditized form of money is like the best because there's a limited amount and because like, you know, people use gold forever or whatever. It was a very conservative ideology, a very libertarian conservative, and therefore a lot of conservative libertarians became very enticed by the idea of Bitcoin and were willing to give their money to people in order to have that sort of ideology, like so that they can live it. You also see this in like in crypto. You know, decentralized autonomous corporation was the original name of a DAO, but that later changed because of Vitalik suggesting like, hey, maybe we shouldn't only be doing corporations. You know, but the fact that the corporation was the first one, I think, tells a lot about the ideological framework of the people who came first and what they were trying to put forth in the world. So this is just like a really common tactic in marketing. People do it everywhere, not just in crypto, but like this is how this can be problematic in certain ways if we aren't aware of it. And so what I really like this like kind of saying is that the map is not the territory. The word is not the thing it describes. Whenever the map is confused with the territory, a semantic disturbance is set up in the organism. The disturbance continues until the limitation of the map is recognized by Alfred Korzybski. And so like representation is something that is kind of unavoidable. We have to keep in mind. But I think what's important at the same time from George Box is that all models are wrong, but some are useful. So we can use representational models to understand things, but some of them are worse than others, right? But representation is a necessary thing in order to kind of reduce complexity, in order to understand and wrap our heads around certain things. But a map itself can be very political. I learned yesterday that in India, there are certain types of maps that are completely illegal to own because it goes against the kind of Hindu nationalist sentiment of the government there. So the types of models or the types of maps that we put over the territory that exists has political consequences. It means that people are going to understand things in particular ways and they're going to go after things in particular ways because that's the map that they're given and that they're trying to follow. And so in my book, I go through what I think are sort of the three most common like overarching representational models that are used in crypto. So section 1 is crypto as money, section 2 is crypto as finance, and section 3 is crypto as coordination. So these are like the three most common ways whenever I like try to find explanations of blockchains or crypto, like this is how people kind of explain it majority of the time. But what you can see with this kind of way that it's being explained and being modeled is that what's essentially happening is the representations are being expanded every time, right? People start off with money and they're like, oh wait, no, we can do more than that, and now we have DeFi, so now everything is finance, and now we have people saying that it's all coordination because of DAOs and things like this. But what's happening is just like the drum machine in the early example, crypto is breaking past its representation every time. But what's, I think, important to understand what's happening underneath is that there is a very complex and large territory of things that are possible or that can happen. And the particular maps that we're sort of drawing on top of it is never going to fully encompass the territory itself, right? Like the map of Peru is always going to be less than the actual existence of Peru, right? Peru is more complicated than like the piece of paper in which you use the map, but the map itself can sometimes be useful. I think in the case here, what we need to understand is kind of the limitations of the maps that we decide to use or not. And so what I think is interesting to also keep in mind why it's been related, especially with a lot of the news that's been happening lately, is sort of understanding that nothing is forever. So that includes the internet. So like thinking of things as kind of like a stable entity can sometimes be very problematic. I think there is kind of this Platonic idealization of things that are static or things that can be static. I think that's why a lot of people are attracted to Bitcoin and the 21 million cap or whatever. But this tends to be and attract a lot of very, very conservative ideals in politics. But we've seen, throughout the past, decades that the internet has changed quite a lot from what we used to think it was to what it is, what it has become and what it is now. We used to have AOL, we used to have MySpace. Now we have like very different types of applications that do very different things and can do more things than they were able to before. And the way that we've been able to understand the internet has changed quite a bit. At the same time, large corporations have sort of slowly coming to the realizations of what ultimately the conclusions of capitalistic business kind of does, and that now kind of the venture capital money is running out. The internet has lasted for a long time and has existed as it has existed because it has been sort of running on an almost like limitless amount of cash that has come from venture capital, because there's always this kind of story and narrative and expectation that if you can fund a whatever software-based startup, then you can make 100x your, the returns that you can make are very, very high. And this is like a model that's used repeatedly over and over and over again in the tech world. And this has continued into crypto world to almost an extreme extent. And I think this has been like why a lot of people have felt, I think, kind of dissatisfied with the current status quo of crypto, where people are sort of subject to the swings of the market, in which case, oh, I have a job when the price is up, and now I'm like not sure if my work is going to continue because the price is down and we're in a bear market and I don't know where to find funding. And so I think this can cause like really like problematic types of dynamics between people and even within themselves. And so one of the things, I'll give you a little tidbit that I think is like a worthy goal of kind of pursuing, like understanding all these things, is that we need to build kind of alternatives to the types of infrastructure that we're building right now. A VC-backed kind of startup is not a kind of collectively owned digital infrastructure, which is what I think that we ultimately need to be building if we want to build something that's truly an alternative to what exists already. So if we think back, like the maps that we're using right now and that we're overlaying onto the territory of crypto are essentially a recreation of what has already existed. And so like now we have the kind of technologies perhaps to build things that are vastly different than what exists today. And so I think it's on us, the people who are wanting to build these things, in order to build them in a way that is structurally very different, that doesn't facilitate the types of social relationships that we're currently reliant on in the kind of traditional tech VC world. And so the book goes into a lot more detail, of course. I've been pretty lucky to get a lot of really nice words from different people. So Vitalik, Nick Cernicek, Primavera De Filippi, and then here's some of the other words in case you're still not convinced from different people. If you go to my website, blockchainsocialist.com, you can also find all these things and more information, or you can just go to the Repeater Books website. But yeah, you can scan that QR code if you want to pre-order it, or you can try your luck. I have a few copies to sell, about 18 or 19 copies to sell outside right afterwards. Yeah, it's called Blockchain Radicals. And then I guess I can take questions. I don't know if I can see if there are questions on the screen or if I should ask the audience. Or like, please go. How to fix it. So I would say, ultimately, what I'm saying, how to fix it, is to radically think or rethink the models in which we are applying ourselves on. So I think the first thing to do in order to radically rethink that is to first understand what is the status quo, like what is the current existing social relationships that we are put under, and if we can understand that first, then we can begin to understand like how do we build something that is very different. And so I think, yeah, for the how to fix it, for me, one of those things is building, like that tweet I put out, building collective infrastructure. So when I say collective infrastructure, I really mean like collectively owned, and one that is not based on like the way that a lot of kind of token governance protocols are kind of done at the moment, where the token is sort of freely available on the free market, where you can buy as many tokens as you want, and the more that you buy, the more power you have. I think that's, if we like map that against what is the status quo, it's essentially the same. I like to say that, you know, the US dollar is like the governance token of global capitalism. And I think it's privy that we try something else.
Are there any good examples of the best crypto projects that are already doing some of this stuff? It's not all terrible, right? Protocols and things that are maybe getting it right or
Are there any that are getting it right? I mean, I think that, yes, it's not all horrible, but there is a lot of horrible, which is why I think, like, I wrote the book especially for people who are very critical, because I think there is a lot to be disappointed by in crypto so far. Like, I think it's really hard to defend at this point, like, no, everything is going great. Like, you know, it's really not. And so there are some projects that I think that are going in a direction that I think are very, very interesting. What I find particularly interesting is that there's a lot of people who are very interested in governance in particular, and sort of collective governance over shared resources. So I think one of the things that is important to keep in mind is that it's not necessarily just like, did they make the right app? Like, I don't think that is like, what's the app that's going to like fix it? But it's that the tools and the infrastructure is able to facilitate like particular types of social dynamics and relationships between people that were very difficult to do before, probably, and that can sort of create more like collective sense making and going after collective endeavors. So yeah, so I mean, I think there are a lot of tools that are like very, very open, like that try to be like as neutral as possible and try to do these things. But so I think that can be a good thing. What's important is that for there to be more people to where they're using that infrastructure in like more collective ways rather than in more privatized ways, if that makes sense. Sure, sure. I think there are things like that are really interesting, like the fact that things are open source. Gitcoin open sourcing their stuff is like an interesting thing. I tend to try to be like skeptical at first, and then like prove it to me. Like I think that's kind of like the thing that I think a lot of people, maybe more people, need to have. Like have them prove it to you that they're doing something good. Doesn't mean that you should completely be turned off by it or like not support it, but I try to be optimistically skeptical, I guess. And then I see something here. How might we operate with non-representational territories? I'm not sure I understand that question. There is representational thinking. There is the territory, which is like the existence of the world, in which it's kind of impossible really to understand, to like completely map out all of existence, right? The entire territory is never going to be mapped out. You always have to map something, like even the fact, like my eyes, like what I see in front of me is just a bunch of neurons in the back of my brain firing to give me this illusion that you guys are in front of me. So like, I think what's important is to kind of like keep in mind the types of maps that you are using and the representations that you are using in order to understand the territory. So like, just to keep in mind that whatever map that you're deciding has political consequences, because you cannot possibly have everything included in your map. There are things that you have to let go, that you have to put down. And that's fine, it's just that making that choice has political consequences. Hope that makes sense. Anything? Just don't tell me. All right, I have a box of books, and I'll just be right outside here, either for 20 euros cash, or if you have crypto, I can do that as well. If you have any bread from the bread chain crowd staking application, then you'll get a discount, do 17 bread. And yeah, I think that's it.